Let's talk about keyword-only arguments in Python. So this function greet accepts any number of positional arguments. So if I give it some names, it's going to print out hello and then the name for each of those names. And it does this through this star that's capturing all the positional arguments given to this function. If I wanted to allow hello to be customized, I could make a variable greeting that's accepted as an argument to this function. So I've got a greeting argument that's accepted. And I might try to call the function like this, tray and hi. Now, this gives me an error. It gives me an error because it says greet is missing one required keyword-only argument greeting. Now, what it's saying is that greeting is a required argument because it doesn't have a default value, and it has to be specified as a keyword argument. We have to say greeting equals hi, greeting equals hello. Now, I probably want greeting to actually have a default value of hello, so I can do that like this. But the important thing to note here is that because greeting is after asterisk names, because it's after that star names in our function definition, it is seen by Python as an argument that can only be provided to this function when it's called as a keyword argument. It can only be given by its name like this, greeting equals something. And this is actually something you'll see in some functions that are built into Python. For example, the built-in print function, it accepts any number of values as well as sep, end, file, and flush. These are keyword-only arguments, and it actually says optional keyword arguments. Now, it doesn't use this star syntax in here because print's documentation is a little bit different from a lot of the documentation for Python functions. But that ... is a way of noting to us that it accepts any number of values, and then afterward, all of these have to be keyword arguments. And if we look on greet, this is the type of thing you'll typically see. Star something, everything after that star has to be specified as a keyword argument. It's actually also possible to make a function that doesn't capture any number of positional arguments, but does have some arguments that can only be specified as keyword arguments. Syntax for this is really weird. It's like this. I'm going to make a multiply function that accepts x and y, but this asterisk comma before them means that x and y have to be specified as keyword arguments. So if I were to try to say multiply 1 and 2, I get an error. I have to say multiply x equals 1, y equals 2. And you can see if I call it with nothing, we'll actually see that same error message as before, missing two required keyword-only arguments, x and y. And you'll actually see this asterisk thing on its own, sometimes within the Python standard library. So for example, in the OS module, the function chown for changing the ownership of a file, it accepts path, UID, GID, and then there's this asterisk that isn't an argument that's being accepted. It's a way of noting that everything after this point can only be specified as a keyword-only argument. So these last two arguments here can only be specified by their name. So follow symlinks equals true or false. We would have to specify that by its name. Follow symlinks equals, not by its position when calling this function. So if you are writing your own function or reading the documentation for a function, star some argument name, that captures any number of positional arguments, but anything after that has to be specified as a keyword argument. And if you see a function that has an asterisk on its own with a comma after it, that means that every argument after that point is a keyword-only argument. It must be specified by its name when that function is called.